Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, the 2026 midterms are approaching, but I think a lot of people making predictions for it make the error of making them seem like they're just around the corner. In fact, the 2026 midterms around now are transitioning from 18 months away to only 17 months away, which, when they say a week is a lifetime in politics, imagine how a year and a half is. Simple fact is, we don't know how these midterms will go. You ask someone in May of 2001, how they think the 2002 midterms will go. They say Democrats have a favorable Senate map, and they recently gained the majority with Jeffords switching. I think they'll be able to make a decent gain, and they'll probably be able to flip the House. Republicans made gains in both chambers in 2002. Simple fact is, you cannot predict what is happening in the future, unless you're me. You see, I consider politics to be relatively evening out enough. Like, the benefits for Republicans will be outweighed by the detractions for them. Same thing with the Democrats, that for the most part, I can anticipate how an election will go this far out. Now, is that because I'm smarter than the average idiot liberal who picks up a computer and a recording software and logs on to YapMS to talk about how Democrats will flip Wyoming in the Senate? Yeah, but who's counting? But the simple fact is, at the end of the day, even though I may pretend to have a massive ego, even I am aware of the fact that I cannot predict elections that far out with absolute certainty. But there's another strategy for people that they use. And I remember all the days back, when the presidential election was 3 or 4 months around the corner. People used to use a certain nowcast. You can even see this in some of the old 538 models. There were two different versions of it. There was the forecast for when the presidential election happens, after the debates, after all of the candidates, you know, do rallies across the country, after the machines work in each state to like their certain political party, after all the fundraising and ad spending. That's about how they think it will go. But if the election were held the day of that forecast, they also have a different model for that. Now, a lot of people use this back in the 2024 presidential election because they had the ability to see the future, similar to a rat stuck in a New York City subway. I don't pride myself on too much. I can pride myself on the simple ability to not be able to think like a goldfish. So I always predicted it, how the election would happen November 5th. But a lot of people didn't. A lot of people did that nowcast, if you may, of the presidential election. And a lot of people do that of different elections. Now, 3 months out, I think that's retarded and gay. I really don't see a reason to like, oh, but if the election happened now, you should have the simple ability to predict what will happen in the campaign, how the polls will move, how momentum can factor into a candidacy, how fundamentals will factor into a candidacy. But I will say 18 months out, it's an interesting way to look at things. Now, I pull up President Trump's approval because this is not the approval you would have a blue wave over. I watched in Radical Politics video on this, how Democrats might have a disappointing year because Trump's approval is very low for Trump. Even if you consider this like a little bit of around 5 years into a presidency, like it's still a decent approval. It's not great, but in the world we live in, it's probably the best you can get. Had Biden been elected in 2024, his approval probably wouldn't be only -4 heading into May this time. The thing is, Trump did have a bit of a surge in approval at the start, but due to some unpopular policies, yes, some economic turmoil, and the fact that most people know Trump and a lot of people aren't willing to give him a chance. In fact, like a 44% disapproval rating right out the bat is pretty historic, and barely being able to crack 50% is also quite historic. And that's kind of the thing you get with a pseudo incumbent. But Trump's approval reached a low of net 7.2, but it has rebounded quite a bit from that low with some less good polls. And I don't mean less good as in bad for Trump. You could say that, but I mean less good in as much as like they are objectively shitty polls. You've seen some of those fall out of the aggregate, and you've seen other polls that are better to some extent, start to fill the aggregate. You had Daily Mail drop today, which was -10 and was included in the aggregate. Um, Now it heads to a tie. That is what's narrowing the aggregate. Part of it is, different pollsters are being like a Democratic favorable pollster being replaced by Rasmussen will almost always favor Trump and Republicans in the aggregate, even if Rasmussen is predicting a rather poor day for Republicans and the Democratic favorable pollster is predicting a good day for Republicans. But you've also seen some polls change, like Daily Mail, Rasmussen. I don't think Reuters, RMJ Research, I think Economist, barely, Morning Consult, Qantas Insight, all of those have changed for the better for Republicans. Big data, if they had done a poll anytime but January, they probably would have been better for Republicans, though it is a 19-point contraction from January. Wow. Whoa. I'm shocked by that. But most of these polls have shown it getting better for Trump, which is why I think his real approval probably stands at maybe about tied. I'd say if I had to give one side the edge, I'd say he's slightly disapproved of. But that's not the type of approval that a Democrat would want for the president when this. No, my bad. When this is the Senate map. You see the map of incumbents looks like this. Democrats are at a measly 47 Senate seats, which sounds like a lot, but one that's probably going to be their high for a while. Um, it really is, and Republicans are 53. If you take the states off the board that the incumbent party's presidential candidate won by less than 10%, and also the crossover states, you can take Maine, which was a Harris plus 7 state, or Harris plus 6, I forget which, potential flip opportunity, and North Carolina. That's it. Republicans have Senate control. And by the way, 50-50 would still be a Republican win. So let's just say the candidate in Iowa, Joni Ernst, shoots a toddler live on stage for one of her rallies. Democrats still don't win the Senate if they win all of these states. And that's not even taking into account that you have an incumbent retiring in Michigan. You have a very, very vulnerable incumbent in Georgia, who I'm going to have a hot take on for this video. And you have other states like Minnesota, New Mexico, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Virginia, which were won by Harris by under 10%. So this is the map. So if Republicans sweep all of these states, let's say it's an exception midterm, people rally around Republicans, Democrats are continuing to be at like a 27% approval rating. Republicans get a supermajority, which means that they don't even have to get rid of the filibuster. They can break the filibuster whenever they want. If Democrats sweep every one of these states, they lose the Senate with 2 seats for Republicans to spare. So even if they sweep every single potentially competitive state and then pull off an upset in a safe Republican state, they still don't win the Senate. So it's pretty bad. It's not the best map, but especially with Trump's job approval being only -3 and realistically about tied, the Democratic Party will definitely weigh themselves down there. Now I will address, if we go here to the generic ballot, I think this is 2026. Democrats are ahead. I don't know how much I believe this because one, most of these pollsters are Democratic favorable. Like you don't see RMG polling it. Um, you don't see Rasmussen polling it. But like you have New York Times, CNN, and Fox News. Which ironic with the name Fox News, but like they're some of the worst polls, highly biased to Democrats. And News Nation, I think this was just a bullshit sample. They have like Trump's approval at -10 or something. But you do see that the generic ballot in most polls, and even though this is like a relatively disfavorable sample for Republicans, you do see in most polls it's either running even or ahead of his approval, which means that if the midterm elections are held today, it would be about a today R+1 national environment. That's like maybe 1.5 points bluer than 2024 on the down ballot level. You do realize that Georgia was decided by more than 1.5 points. And that Michigan was right on the money there. Democrats would be expected. And by the way, that's the down ballot. Um, it's the down ballot margin. My apologies. Like for the House. If it were on the presidential level, that'd be about a 0.48% swing to the left. That flips none of these states. Using that, reasoning with that, you lose Michigan and Georgia, and you flip Maine. That's a net loss of one. That's Republicans sweeping about every competitive state. Now, of course, my prediction is different than that. I will be assuming an R+1 generic ballot, but I think that that turns into a different Senate map. So, anyways, if you like this video, make sure to comment down below, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Yeah, if you like this video, like the video. Mind blown. But yeah, let me just take apart some of these states that I think will be under 10 in this scenario. I think that's probably it. What an impressive Senate map for Democrats. But yeah, subscribe, comment down below, share with your friends. Thank you for watching this far. Hopefully you make it through the rest of the video. But let's get into it. So I say these are the safe states. I really don't think any of these are competitive. The ones of note are Ohio. Husted is a pretty phenomenal nominee, even though the state isn't trending as red as I might like. And I do think that there's a scenario in 2028 if Republicans do poorly that the state could once again be under 10. I don't think it trends Democrat, but I think the problem is, especially Franklin and the suburban areas around that, Hamilton, the suburban areas around that, and parts of Cuyahoga really aren't shifting Republican. Of course, they shifted kind of Republican, but in general, they didn't shift that Republican. Clark County, I found that hilarious. That's solely the Springfield, Ohio stuff, which we were told was a lie. Wait, so they really were? I don't think I can say what they were doing on YouTube, but that wasn't a lie? Whoa. But, you even saw Claremont County shift left. Like, for the most part, I think Republicans could make slight gains here, in an R+1.5 national environment, but since it is shifting 0.5 Democrat, I think that Ohio might even shift Democrat. Whoa, I think it did trend to the left of the nation, if I'm not mistaken. And I could see that continuing if, Republicans continue to be maxed in some of these areas, but I do think you'll continue to see these rural areas shift right. And I think Husted could hold the margin in the suburbs, maybe even outperform, depending on where this wave is regionalized. But Nebraska also, Dan Osborne, I mean, he ran against a pretty phenomenal incumbent in 2024. Like, Deb Fischer was an exceptional nominee. Phenomenal in how it's phenomenal that she was nearly able to lose that race, and exceptional as in she is the exception to being a good Republican incumbent senator electorally. Like, even Josh Hawley underperformed. Okay, you didn't underperform by 15 points. Like, I'm sorry, Dan Osborne was an independent. Wow, I don't care. You don't lose Sarpy County as a Republican. You run Jesus fucking Christ in Nebraska as a Democrat, as an independent backed by Democrats even. You shouldn't be losing Sarpy County. Deb Fischer was uniquely horrible. She did not know how to run a campaign for her life. I don't really think Pete Ricketts is too much better than her. I still think he's good enough to win by a safe margin in normal circumstances, and definitely here. I think Osborne crashes and burns. I mean, he's just become a perennial candidate at this point. Like, he had his moment in 2024. He was funded by the DNC so much, but like, at this point, one, he doesn't even determine Senate control. Like, the point of that was, oh, okay, well, if we sweep every state, 50, that would be Pennsylvania would be 48, Ohio would be 49, Nebraska actually would be 50 instead of Montana. Good job, John Tester. But I really don't think he has the same type of scenario that happened in 2024 that will at all make it close. And say for Democrats, I mean, really, Colorado's the only one of note here. Really not shifting that good for Republicans. And I think this is Hickenlooper. He's a very strong candidate, defeated an incumbent by 9 in 2020, and not the strongest incumbent. Corey Gardner certainly didn't act like a moderate, but I still think he's strong enough to outrun the generic ballot by quite a bit. But here, as for the likely states, I think Iowa's likely in this scenario. I have some hot takes on it for my midterm prediction in June, but for now, I do think Iowa probably ends up likely Republican. Ernst is not the greatest candidate, and I don't think the GOP coalition Iowa's built too much for off-year elections. You can use the special elections as example of this. Oh my God, Democrats flipped a special election in ancestrally Democrat territory with no turnout whatsoever and a horrible, horrible Republican nominee. But there was another one in also ancestrally Democrat territory. Wow. And they didn't even flip that one. But they also outperformed in solid Democrats, Cedar Rapids, where Republicans didn't turn out because there was nothing competitive on the ballot and they were never winning that race. And also it had 10% turnout. But that means the Iowa Democrats are competent. It could be like, oh, Rob Sand, I nearly forgot his name. I'm surprised it actually came to me right when I was supposed to say it. But Rob Sand is running for governor. Wow. Did I ask? Rob Sand won because was barely contested in 2022. Like, it's insane. I think it was Miller was the attorney general. Miller was probably the stronger candidate, but what happened was Brenna Byrne actually ran a campaign against him, and guess what? Now his ass is having the door slammed on it. Like he lost. He lost even though he was there for like 40 years. Rob Sand is a state auditor. He won a down ballot position because he didn't face real opposition, which that real opposition got within a point of unseating him, or that unreal opposition got within a point of unseating him. The only reason it was considered a real opposition was because after the election, we retroactively said, oh, wow, it was close. Therefore, Rob Sand, this massive performer who went up against a strong candidate. Like, no, no, even though the GOP coalition isn't built for off years, and Rob Sand could have coattail effects, Rob Sand's not getting the gubernatorial race within five. Like, whether it be Feenstra or someone else, I really don't think he stands much of a chance. And especially for the Iowa Senate election, I mean, if the generic ballot is R plus one, Ernst isn't going to underperform Trump. She's not going to underperform Trump by nearly enough to make that race close. Same thing with Texas. I think Paxton wins. I don't think Paxton would get Trump's margins in suburbia. He was very toxic to the suburbs. I also don't think he'd get his margins in Latino areas. Like, I don't think Ken Paxton wins Webb County. Whoa! Breaking news. But I do think he can relatively about match Trump's margins in some of these suburban counties. Like, I think he loses Tarrant, and well, I think like the Senate election on the same ballot. Like, he loses Williamson, loses Tarrant narrowly. Fort Bend and Harris are a little bit more solid. And losing Tarrant was probably just because Allred was from the area. Like, and the funny thing is he kind of barely overperformed the top ticket. But like, he does worse in the Hispanic areas. But like, you still have a big rural base in Texas. Texas is trending heavily right, which I'm never going to stop doing victory laps about. I was right. Wow, that wouldn't be the first time. But Texas is trending heavily right. It's going to be very hard to unseat an incumbent in Texas, or unseat a incumbent statewide official in Texas, even if he's primaried out incumbent senator. But there's polls showing Colin Allred at 56%. Whoa, wow, that's such a real poll. But there's another poll that shows him up by one. Who could that be funded by? Maybe the incumbent senator who has been trailing in almost every poll and whose only argument to GOP donors, to Trump, and to Republicans who might vote in the primary is, I am the only one who can win the general election. It's weird how all the polls that show Paxton down have been funded by him, but I think Paxton should be fine. I'm basically going to consider him the presumptive nominee. That's going to be a fun primary to watch, whether Paxton wins in the general election or the initial election or the runoff. I also see that primary get more crowded and Cornyn not even make the runoff election. If Wesley Hunt jumps in, there's a chance Cornyn doesn't even make a runoff. Which one of the greatest ideas I've ever heard. An incumbent senator placing third in a primary. If only, if only. But yeah, I think Paxton should be able to do relatively well. He's not going to match Trump's margins, but he's going to get around what Cruz got, especially if the national environment isn't shifting a point left. Or not even a point left. And then probably for likely Republican, likely Democrat. I'm going to put Illinois. Illinois was already kind of close. It's trending Republican. I think Democrats, especially in a midterm, wouldn't be able to reach their margin in Cook County. I think turnout would also go down in the rural areas, but I think the suburbs would be okay, especially since we have a competitive Democrat primary. On the front runner, or actually, there's probably two front runners. I think it's Robin Kelly. I think has most of the endorsements. You have where is he? He has a funny name. Where is he? District 8. We find District 8. Will you find me District 8, Soaring? Here. Raja Krishnamurthy. which is basically like if my name was Tester Godstein. Like, what? Why are you? It's like all the people who named Jesus. Like, why are you named? Why would you name yourself after God? But he's a candidate. I don't know how well he'd do. He could do okay. But you also have Robin Kelly, who is retiring to run for that seat. She has quite a few endorsements, I think. It's either Krishnamurthy or Kelly. I think it's Kelly. It's like a bunch of endorsements from the local state party, from down ballot officials, and from other representatives. But you also have the lieutenant governor, forget her name, running for Senate. She has the endorsement of J.B. Pritzker, which is kind of the only one that matters because he has millions that he will dump into a Senate primary, mind you. Not even like a general election. Not even like if the Senate election were competitive in the general, and then he dumps money into it to help the national Democrats' chances. No, 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 no. A Senate primary just to help his running mate run away from his constituents faster. So rather than whatever date Illinois has the turnover from governor to the next governor, she can be out by January 3rd. But I think she should probably be the favorite. Republicans look like I love politics. It looks like Republicans will be running. I'm trying to say this with a straight face. Rod Blagojevich. Republicans will be running former governor of Illinois, Rod Blagojevich, who, mind you, was a former Democrat governor. Looks like he probably seeks the seat. I honestly think he'd be a good nominee. I think he'd be able to do good in places like Chicago. Maybe not in the suburban counties because he was indicted for selling Obama's Senate seat. That's why he resigned, and that's why he nearly lost in 2010. I love Illinois politics. That's why he was forced to resign as governor. Was indicted, imprisoned, I think released by Trump. But I also think he'd be able to do good in the rural areas. And I think I just don't think any Democrat nominee after such a bruising primary would be strong. So I think Illinois is under 10 with Rod Blagojevich. I, I love politics. Corey Gardner also wins by a likely margin. He's an old performer, but New Jersey is trending heavily right. We got to wait and see on that gubernatorial election. Primary turnout looks good for us and also good for Steve Sweeney if he still stands a chance. But we got to see because Democrats nominate someone crazy for there and Citarelli wins, or even if Mickey Sherrill, doesn't succeed in running a campaign solely focused on Trump, which I think she would succeed, but there's a chance she doesn't. Um, then potentially Citarelli could leverage that influence to help out Republicans in the Senate election. But Virginia also, Kamala Harris plus 6 to 8. I think you'll see maybe Republicans continue trends in Nova, but you also do have Mark Warner likely running for re-election. I love how Democrats tried to force him out. Like, good job. That's actually a sentence you could lose if you forced him out. But he's a massive performer. Has a lot more appeal than the average Democrat. Some of these rural areas, like the peninsula, some of the rural areas of like Appalachia, if you want to be a fucking nerd about it. Some of these black areas here. I think he continues on the Democratic trend in Richmond, and I do think there's a slight blowback to Trump in like the Hampton Roads area. So I think he wins by a likely margin, and that is it for the likely Democrat states. Now, lean Republican. And I think it's kind of obvious which state I put as lean Republican. I mean, you have it. It's trending a bit away from Republicans, but at the end of the day, like it's an R+1 generic ballot, so I do think that out of the state of Georgia, Republicans win it by a lean margin over an incumbent senator, John Ossoff. Yeah, I got you with that. Ha ha ha! You really should have expected that. I've made that joke before, but yeah, this is not. Oh, he must not know that Kemp is running. Wow, it's as if I was already talking about how Republicans could win without Kemp before he announced he wasn't running. But yeah, the problem is one. Like I said, if you have an R+1 generic ballot, Georgia's still R+1.5. But also if it's an incumbent, he's not a really strong incumbent. GOP has a solid bench. The candidates are one John King, the state auditor, I think, or lands commissioner, Hispanic, probably an illegal immigrant, but still pretty strong nominee, won by a lot in 2022. Would appeal a lot to the minority Asian population in Georgia, which still is kind of important. to winning the state, and probably would be able to hold his own in the urban areas, especially with the decrease in black turnout. But we'll get to that later. And it would be able to do well in the rural areas. I think he'd win. But you also have Buddy Carter, who's already announced. Buddy Carter is a pretty good nominee. He hasn't been tested in a competitive race on the national level, but like he nearly won Liberty and shot him. Like to put that in perspective, Liberty was a Harris plus 17 county that was within six, and Chatham County was a Harris plus 18 county that was within eight. So yeah, overperforming Trump by 18 is a little bit of a strength out of the Republican, but not overwhelmingly Republican first district. Like if Democrats wanted to win the state by like 5 or 6, you'd be very close to winning the first district, which is the average Democrat prediction for this race. But obviously, they don't know what they're talking about. They never have. But Buddy Carter would be a good nominee. He really hasn't been tested on the statewide level, but he's outperformed Trump and other Republicans in almost every election he's run in. He's not that great on the issues, but he would do much better among the establishment, among the few Republicans in places like suburbia that you have lost in recent years. Um, He'd also be able to do well in the southern area of the state and some of these urban areas. I also think supporting liberty, Chatham would translate to places like Richmond, Bibb, and Muscogee County. You also have potentially, though he hasn't announced, he's hinted towards it a lot, Mike Collins, a Trump favorite, um, who could potentially run for Senate. He's doing he's done okay in the elections he's running. Not phenomenal. He's only been an incumbent for now 2 terms. This was his first re-election, but he's done pretty good. He's a fighter. He's a terminally online Twitter autist as well. But he's a fighter, which is something you'd like to have out of a representative. And he's done relatively well compared to the top ticket here. Was that because he was virtually uncontested? I mean, I don't think Lexi Doherty was putting up too much of a fight in an R plus 20 district, but who knows? Maybe she was favored to win by some internet autists who spend their time spamming Mike Collins' comment section. But I think he'd be an okay statewide nominee, a bit closer to Trump. Probably would get a Trump endorsement in the primary. I don't know how well he'd do statewide. I don't think he'd be able to take down someone like Warnock. I don't think he's quite at that tier. Um, but I think he'd do okay. And then MTG has declined. That was hilarious. The idea that she would run, and the idea by people like Ossoff Stan, who tries to kill himself every time Democrats don't win a statewide election in Georgia, that she would run and get the Trump endorsement. I wonder where he got that from. He pulled it straight out of his ass. But I think Republicans would do relatively well in a Georgia off year. One, Democrats don't have a gubernatorial nominee, so any coattails for them, the reverse coattails of the gubernatorial election affecting the Senate election, you can throw that out the window. And in fact, if you want to be a reverse coattails believer, why don't you believe in these fucking coattails of Republicans winning that gubernatorial election by 6 to 7 around a Kemp margin? Because you have an off year election that's around the same as Kemp versus Abrams, and while Kemp was a relatively popular figure, Republicans also do have a pretty phenomenal bench for Georgia governor as well. So why don't you look at those reverse coattails? But I think the problem for Georgia Democrats is you'll have a complete collapse in black turnout in urban Atlanta, and college-educated whites, and even college-educated voters as a whole leave. No, not leave. Lean heavily, heavily, heavily Republican. Also, perhaps could do better among them, but he won't do good enough to win with a decrease in black turnout. Plus, if he goes to a runoff, I think he's pretty much dead on arrival for that, seeing as black turnout will go down even more. And with Democrats likely not capturing the Senate, or actually, I can say with complete confidence, if Democrats are heading to a runoff in Georgia, if Ossoff does not win outright, unless he's convicted of raping a minor, if Ossoff does not win outright, Democrats have not won the Senate. The turnout depression from that and the fact that Republicans probably end up with 51 to 52 seats in that scenario would kill his chances in a runoff. I'd say that's it for lean Republican. For now, eh, I'd say Maine. It's like a 2 to 3 point win for Republicans. I've been laughed at a lot by this, or with my take of Susan Collins losing re-election. I think her appeal is paper thin. I think the state has trended left from 2020 relative to the national environment, and even as a whole. I mean, Mills won by like 13. Uh, Something insane. The main GOP is not at all competent. I think the problem for her is she relies on outperforming in these coastal elite areas, and I think she would. I don't think she'd lose by 7 on the average scenario. I don't think she'd outperform by enough to win. But in this scenario, we're not. Okay, some voice just whispered game in my ear. Thank you. We're not having around the D+2 or so generic ballot that I'm expecting in most of my predictions. Instead, we're having probably around an R+1 year in Maine, which means that I'd say it's around this margin, maybe slightly more Democrat on average. But Susan Collins is an overperformer. Democrats have shown reluctance to challenge her, which could just be out of pure laziness or the fact that they're stupid. Or else it could be because I'm stupid and Susan Collins would win by 15. But I say for now, I'd expect her to win by like 3 if the election were held today. Something small like that. And that's it for the lean Republican states. Leaning Democrat, the first one would actually be New Mexico. You have Ben Ray Lujan up this time, and even though I'm not a believer in New Mexico trends whatsoever, I'm not one of those people who say, "Oh, we'll flip by the end of the decade." It's the same people who think that Oklahoma will flip blue by the end of the decade, by the way. But I do think in this scenario, Ben Ray Lujan is not a good nominee, and I think 2020 he underperformed by quite a bit. I think that's more. Um, I think that's more him being a bad nominee than his challenger Mark Ronchetti being a good nominee. Who knows? It might have been Oliver and Cuddy, and you could win by like 20 in this scenario. But I do think um, if it were like an R+1 environment, you'd see him underperform quite a bit in places like Bernalillo, Santa Fe, Sandoval, very suburban areas, very Democrat heavy areas. And I think in the rural areas, Republicans would run it up. Plus, New Mexico GOP has an okay bench for Senate and governor. I think you see areas like Cibola, Guadalupe flip. Some of these Hispanic trends continue a little bit. Maybe they could reverse. Like even Ronchetti won Socorro and got close to winning Cibola. Like I think the Hispanic trends in New Mexico is strong enough to continue into midterm elections. So I think because of that, stays narrowly under 5%. I'd also put Minnesota here. You have a pretty fun primary and a pretty competitive primary stacking up between Peggy Flanagan, the lieutenant, lieutenant governor of Minnesota, backed by Tim Walz. I think. Actually, I don't even think she's running on being the lieutenant governor of Minnesota. She's running as far away from Walz as possible, so probably not backed by Tim Walz. And then Andrew Craig, the representative from Minnesota, second. I think it's going to be an interesting primary. You'll see Andrew Craig outperform in these suburban areas, maybe even in a place like Hennepin. Um, I'm not sure about that. And if Craig could also win the rural areas, it'll be an interesting primary. Uh, Anyways, I said Peggy Flanagan slightly favored. She's not a good nominee in Minnesota, even though it really didn't move that Republican in 2024. You do have to realize that the running mate was switched from California to Minnesota with a somewhat popular governor, not too popular. People made it out like, oh my god, he's so likable. He still went into the election with a negative favorability rating. Well, all the polls showed it positive. Exit polling showed it negative. Guess who was positive though? J.D. Vance. But I do think that helped Harris in Minnesota. I think Minnesota, you can see these rural areas potentially solidify more, but even you don't have to have that for it to be a lean march. You just have to have Republicans not completely shit the bed in Minneapolis, which if it's going to be an R+1 environment, they won't. And you could even see it move more Republican in 2024 if these rural areas do solidify. And if you see some hype around Tim Walz being the vice presidential nominee fade, you could potentially see areas like Hennepin County and Ramsey County and even Anoka County, the suburban areas of those, fall off a tiny bit for Democrats. I hate to say it because someone's going to take it out of context and be like, "Oh my god, you were wrong," when she wins by like 8. But I would say that Minnesota is potentially in this scenario, which is not my official scenario, a sleeper flip for Republicans, just because Democrats wouldn't be paying attention to it. Um, and Peggy Flanagan is not a strong nominee, so I think in this scenario it's actually a low lean margin, like 1 to 2%. And then these are the tilt states. The first one tilting Republican. I'd say Michigan probably tilts. No, wrong tab. Michigan probably tilts Republican. One, if you have the shifts that you do have in this scenario, Michigan is like R+0.9, hovering right about that lean margin mark. I do also think that Mike Rogers is a strongish nominee. He did end up losing in 2024, but part of that was due to Liz Slotkin being a pretty good nominee. Um, and of course, look who was on the ballot. But this time you have a very competitive Democratic primary, unlike here where she won 75% of the vote, which is insane for a non incumbent, even if there's only 2 candidates on the ballot. But she was backed by most factions of the Michigan Democratic Party. She also significantly overperformed in all of her elections The fact that she even lost Eaton County is insane. Like that's part of her district. That's insane to me. And I think Mike Rogers, he's a relatively strong nominee, could have some more appeal to the establishment than someone like Trump. Just kind of what you need in an off year in Michigan. I think you'll also have the gubernatorial election go pretty well for Republicans if this is if this is the scenario R+1. It's going to go pretty well for Republicans. But I also think you see the margin in Wayne County fall. You have a very brutal Democratic primary. It seems like the front runner is Michigan Representative Haley Stevens from District 11. We want to talk about Kamala Harris being bad about Palestine. She's going to collapse in Wayne County. But while I think she does potentially do better than Harris in some of these suburban counties, I don't think she makes it up in places like Wayne. I think you'll see some rural areas. If they don't, either the rural areas solidify because it's high turnout, or you see turnout just completely dip in Wayne County, and areas like Ottawa County, what little bit of the rural areas turn out on some of the other heavily suburban counties, like maybe Macomb. I think Rogers outperforms in Kent, and even these rural areas, I think, are just enough to overcome the Detroit only strategy of the modern Michigan Democrats. So I think that's a Republican flip. Uh, New Hampshire, I think, is very close. I think this is a sleeper race again, even more than Michigan. Even if it's like in our D plus two environment, New Hampshire really didn't shift Democrat, but it shifted much more Republican than I thought. Like I didn't think New Hampshire would be shifting. What is that? 4 to 5 points Republican. That's nearly in line with the national environment. Now you might say, "Oh, New Hampshire is very anti-incumbent." We really haven't seen that in recent years. I thought 2020 was just Democrats eventually taking New Hampshire, even though Kamala Harris won and won it by more than Hillary Clinton. It's still a far cry from the overperformance that Maggie Hassan had in that 2022 Senate race. Like kind of insane when the Trump campaign didn't even contest New Hampshire until the very, very end. But I think there's hope for Republicans yet in New Hampshire. Looks like you will have the Democratic nominee. He's kind of uncontested. Beat Chris Pappas. He's a strong candidate, but he also hasn't really faced a real election. I don't even think in his entire career. Even though it's a competitive district, Republicans have kind of written it off. 2022, you could say, is the exception, but even 2022, he was pretty much predestined to win because of how much Hassan won the district by, and he overperformed by a little bit. He's a strong candidate, but I also think the likely Republican nominee, Scott Brown, is a very strong candidate as well. And I think it balances out to some extent. And I think because of the environment, and because of the fact that I don't think New Hampshire is trending Democrat, and because you'll also probably have Kelly out on the ballot and she'll carry Republicans, because the New Hampshire GOP on a local level is very competent, I think you'd see it be a tilt margin. And then North Carolina, this is a hard one. If I could go here and be like, toss up, cop out, I suck, then and do that and be like, guys, look, I put it as a toss up like every EPO video being like fucking this. But if I could do that, I really could. I'm much more of a doomer on North Carolina than the average Republican. Um, I, I think Tom Tillis is a phenomenally weak candidate. And I think North Carolina, a lot of the GOP margin depends on these rural areas and on these suburban areas that won't turn out. And rather than Georgia, where a lot of the Democratic margin is black voters, like it's almost exclusively black voters who have moved into Atlanta, Fulton County, and the surrounding counties in recent times. North Carolina, I think a lot of this is highly educated Democrats. Now, if Cooper runs, I think this race is over. Um, or I don't think it's over in this scenario, but I think in our timeline it's over. If it's at all going to be a Democrat-leaning environment, because I don't think Tillis is a strong enough candidate to beat Cooper. Who, one, you'll have turnout decrease in these rural areas, and two, Cooper is specifically slated to appeal to rural areas, so you have like the double whammy of that, making it so that all these rural areas shift left by like 5 to 6%. I don't think that Tillis is at all poised to do well in these urban areas. Um, I think I think gun to my head, if we assume that Tillis is guaranteed to be the nominee, and I think it's Wiley Nichols going to be the nominee, this is hard. This is really hard. If Cooper's the nominee, I think that Democrats are favored, but if Nicholas is the nominee, I just don't think Tillis is a strong enough candidate to win in an off year when there's basically nothing else on the ballot. No gubernatorial election, no presidential election, obviously. There's like Supreme Court elections, whoa, and then House elections, whoa. The only competitive one is in the Northeast, and the Supreme Court elections, I mean, no one's going to turn out for that. There's not even other statewide elections up. I think if we assume that Tillis is guaranteed to be the nominee, I think it narrowly tilts Democrat. Shoot me. I don't care. But But and this is gonna be a bit of a cop out, but it, it's funny enough that I'll let it stand, and I do believe it. I think that Tillis has not he's not likely to be primaried, but there's a chance he is. And this scenario is an R plus one wave. If Tillis is primaried, I think the Republican successor would win. And I think if you look at the scenarios with Tillis versus Nickel, it's about 50-50, but the slight edge to Nickel. I think for now, based on what Cooper has said, I think it's slightly more likely that Tillis is primaried, which is a Republican win, than Cooper runs, which isn't guaranteed to be a Democrat win in this scenario, but could be a Democrat win. So I think, and you do that math, Republicans are slightly favored to win North Carolina Senate election, which means Republicans emerge with a net gain of 2. Of course, if Michigan and North Carolina, margin of error states, end up going Democrat, it's only a neutral gain. If Maine ends up going Democrat, because even I overestimated Susan Collins' appeal, which, like, 100% could be the case. I'm not going to say that, she's guaranteed to win this scenario. I think that if she's really a paper tiger, like I'm saying, there's a chance that she could underperform by more than anyone thinks and lose here. But for now, I think Republicans will be slated to make a 2-seat net gain. In this scenario, with an R plus one wave, I think the seats that could end up swinging one way or the other would be this. I really think that Ossoff would be fucked in this scenario, like completely out of the question that he wins. Um, and or actually, every Democrat would say he wins, but I think, according to my logic and according to what I think, there would really be no question of whether he wins or not. I think it's a lean margin. I think it's nearly a likely margin by probability, just because of how much turnout goes down in the Atlanta metropolitan area. Um, but the final prediction, not final prediction. I guess it actually would be a final prediction if the election were happening tomorrow. But the prediction for if the election were happening tomorrow is this. Let me delete the toss-up cop out. I suck category, but this would be the prediction. Anyways, thank you for watching. This video is a bit more rambly. It's 42 minutes. My apologies. But yeah, this was fun. This is an interesting way to look at it. And this is why I don't do now casts for the Senate, because I think that it's quite obvious that Democrats will do better than the R plus one environment that I uh, anticipate here. I think that Trump's approval will go down, like most presidents do. I don't think the Democratic Party will be as incompetent as they are now. Like I said, I have more of an ability than a goldfish to look forward into the future. And call it doomerism. I think it's called realism, or at least being able to accept that not everything will go perfect for my party. But if the election were held today, pretty much would be perfect for Republicans. You can have a net gain of 2 in a midterm. Uh, that's the exact same as when Democrats had an incumbent in North Dakota for Senate. Except this time, you're taking down an incumbent in a Trump plus 2 state that voted Democrat 4 years ago, and then you're winning an open seat against the strongest Democrat candidate in Michigan, a state that went Democrat 2 years ago, or in Georgia for Senate went Democrat 2 years ago, but the state where Democrats won every race 2 years ago by 15, on a state that voted for Biden by 3 4 years ago. But yeah, I don't think this will be what it is at the end. It could be like this that removes it. Um, be like, this is if it happens today. Please no sue. Ooh, and I could add exclamation points for emphasis. But yeah, I trust you guys won't screenshot this and spread it everywhere and give it to Bad Electoral Takers and be like, "Oh my God, testers, those are so dumb!" And you'd have to include the title of the video in that to do so, anyways. But you can always right click inspect element, and change it to like the worst case scenario for Republicans. I don't know. I have fun. Thank you for watching. Godspeed, testers.